Thank you for being with me, and greetings to you all today, with gratitude to everyone from the Lake Erie Institute, because each of us, all of us, are serving the great work of our time, which is the healing and the protection of our living planet, our common home. And I'm delighted to have been invited to reflect with you on the Catholic expression of ecological spirituality as part of this very rich multi-faith series. As Dr. Bremer noted, I am a Catholic sister of the Congregation of Notre Dame. I'm a teaching theologian. I'm a Green Faith Fellow, and I'm the animator of an Institute for Earth and Spirit at Iona College. And probably like most of you, I have been living the last decades of my life engaged in what my mentor, Father Thomas Berry, the esteemed geologian and deep historian from Fordham University, has called the great work of our time, which is the generation of a radically new relationship between the human species and the Earth community in all its myriad manifestations, as we got some sense of in the canticle today. Indeed, actually, Father Thomas said that the great work of our Anthropocene, if our living planet is to survive it, is nothing less than the reinvention of the human species, a profoundly new iteration of our human nature, healed of its violence and aggression against the other members of our planetary commune. This is, Thomas said, the work of generations now and to come, and it will take all the effort and will and genius of our species to carry it out, if we would bring our living Earth through this dark night of ecological desolation into which our species has brought it. Clearly, and not a moment too soon, this great work has begun all over the planet, and we are evidence of that today, all 34 participants of us. It's happening in barrios and in universities, in mosques, in kindergartens, in the halls of the United Nations, and even, however lethargically, in the halls of the White House and of Congress. It springs up everywhere, from the vital impulse of our Mother Earth herself, in her labor to live and to continue to give life to all living kind. It springs up also, and with particular urgency and intention, from within the faith traditions of the human community, from those reservoirs of mystical and moral insight and practice that have, where they remain pure and vital, that have sustained the spirit life of our species. The spirit life of our species is our unique mediation of the spirit life of the living planet herself and the living cosmos, laboring away at some mysterious birth, an ineffable and ongoing urgency to become more. The what and why and which we humankind are still wondering about. As each religious tradition accepts the timely challenge to refine and renew and upgrade its most ancient understandings of the sacred sense of the cosmos, and that, by the way, is why I played that canticle for us, that Celtic canticle, because that springs up from some of the ancient reservoirs of our Christian tradition. So, as each religious tradition accepts this challenge to upgrade its ancient understandings of the sacred sense of the cosmos as a manifestation of the ultimate reality, new depths of awareness arise in believers of all kinds, if, that is, if their ministers faithfully teach and preach their ecological legacy. It's my blessing to live in one such community of faith, the old and venerable Catholic Christian tradition, among the multiple lineages that flow from the original event of what we call the Christ. And I think we got some sense of the encompassing mystery of what we Christians, especially Catholic Christians, understand to be the Christ. The Christ, not simply as an historical personality or religious tradition founder, but rather the Christ as a radiant spiritual field of energy and divine presence. The Catholic Christian tradition, among the multiple lineages that flow from the original event of the living Christ, Roman Catholicism is the first, perhaps the first. I think our Orthodox siblings would wrestle with me on that. The oldest of these faith expressions, perhaps simultaneous with the Orthodox tradition. And since the Catholic community is my home ground, I'd like to share with you our most current teaching and practice of what we are calling ecological spirituality. So I think, as everyone knows, in 2015, the Argentine Jesuit Jorge Bergoglio, now Pope Francis I, published the first and most important encyclical of his papacy, Laudato Si, on the care of our common home. It is a compendious presentation of the state of our planet and the challenge to Catholic Christians to take up an urgent, radical, and vigorous conversion of life in defense of our common home. But this letter, which, by the way, is the normal way that the Church teaches, is not simply addressed to the 1+ billion Catholics worldwide. It's actually a letter to everybody. So, this is a very highlight and brief offering for us to have a sense of what Catholic creation spirituality is at the present moment. This letter, this teaching, was given in Rome at the Basilica of St. Peter on the Feast of Pentecost, which, as those of you in the Jewish tradition know, is a very, very solemn and important event in both of our traditions. We celebrate it differently, and yet it is a great tradition, in which Francis said, "I wish to address every person living on this planet." So this was not a letter simply to be offered to or received by Catholic Christians. It was for everyone with whom Francis wanted to enter into a dialogue about our common home. The document, as I think you perhaps know, is taken from another beautiful canticle of creation, this one attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, a 13th century Franciscan mystic who lived a very brief life but has influenced the world tremendously. And his song begins, Laudato si, o mi Signore, praised be to you, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth. The song itself is an invocation to celebrate the living God through the mediation of our sister Mother Earth, who sustains us and governs us, who produces fruit and herbs and flowers for us. In the words of this beautiful canticle, Francis reminds us that our planet, our living planet, is a common home. She's like a sister with whom we share our life. She's also like a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. Francis, that is to say, the Pope, then goes on very quickly in his letter to all of us, in the second paragraph, to say, this sister, our Mother Earth, now cries out to us because the harm we've inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her to nurture us. We've come to see ourselves as her lords and masters, entitled to plunder her at will. And then Francis gets right to the root of the dysfunction, the disorientation in the human nature, which has caused the desolation of the earth. It is the violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin. Sin for us meaning a disorientation, a being outside of the field of grace by our own recalcitrance. Wounded by sin and reflected in the symptoms of the sickness evident in the soils, the water, the air, in all forms of life on this planet. So it's an extraordinary, really, it's an extraordinary catechesis for those of us who are Catholic Christians. It gives us a whole way of understanding what is happening. He then says, I urgently appeal for a new dialogue with everybody about how we're to shape the future of our planet. We need a conversation to include everyone, since the environmental challenge we're undergoing has its human roots concern and affect us all. And I'd like to just point out the joyous parade that Green Faith, I'm at the back somewhere leading the chant, but these are all members of Green Faith, all of the beautiful multi-faith coalition who went to Rome when Francis promulgated this teaching, and we threw a parade for him, and we threw a big, huge festival for him through Green Faith, and it was just one of the most marvelous events. So he says it's his hope that this encyclical letter, which, by the way, now is added to the Church's social teaching, can help to acknowledge the appeal and the immensity, the urgency of the challenge. Now, when he says in this document, it's added to the Church's social teaching, it means this is de fide. This is now what the Church community holds to be our living faith. The Pope wanted to make very clear that this green encyclical was also a social encyclical. I think you know that the Church's social teaching really is in so many ways what's driving the whole entourage of the Christian pilgrimage through this planet. The Pope wanted to make sure that this was not simply about the organic living earth exclusively, but it was about the human community embedded integrally in the living earth system. And so we had to realize that to be a truly ecological teaching and approach, it had to be social. In other words, we have to integrate questions of justice into debates about the environment, so that here it is, this is the key that unlocks our ecological spirituality right now, the summons to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. The document unfolds in 6 chapters, and lucky for us, I'm not going to go through the 6 chapters, but I'll just let you see the headings. In the first chapter, Francis really explores with scientists, with ecologists, with social scientists and theologians, what's happening to our common home. This is where all of the really intensive science is happening. And by the way, there were panels of scientists enabling the construction of this document. In the second chapter, this chapter is really much, much more faith-based. It's addressed largely to the Christian community about what we call the gospel of creation. Well, actually, I should say what we are now calling the gospel of creation. And I'll reflect on that a little bit as we go along. In the third chapter, the Pope really digs deep into the human roots of the ecological crisis, deeply psychological chapter. Its analysis is quite profound. Actually, one could not exhaust the depth of this teaching in 6 summary chapters. In the 4th chapter, really Francis and the team that create this teaching unpack what we now mean by integral ecology, the multiple ecologies in which everything coheres, and how all of these ecologies must be considered in their interwoven unity. Chapter 5, this is where we get into really the action-oriented teaching. This is where we get into our political teaching. This is where we hear the summons to really move into the world, to embody this teaching. The 6th is the last and longest chapter, and it's on ecological education and spirituality. And again, we won't look at that, but we will just highlight some of it. I did want to return a little bit to chapter 2, the gospel of creation, because I think this helps us understand what our motivation is, what the vision is. And of course, this is not just an exhortation or a moral challenge to the Christian community. It is a mystical undertaking. And that's a really important thing. Mysticism meaning a sense of perception, a sense of consciousness of divinity embodied, because that's what especially Catholic Christianity is. It's not simply following our marvelous, marvelous pioneer of faith, Jesus of Nazareth, but it is actually living and laboring to become the body of the living, ongoing Christ, who is for us the pioneer of evolution. So the gospel of creation for us is rooted in the richness, particularly of the Judaic tradition, with its world affirmation, with its sense of divinity as creator of a good and beautiful and sacred cosmos. In the Christian tradition, we lean, as much as we lean on scripture, we lean on tradition, which means we lean on the ways that our ancestors in the faith understood things and taught things. It becomes for us the big compendious legacy. The gospel of creation for us is radiant with this sense, this very numinous sense of the living Christ. This is so hard, I think, for people to understand in the Christian tradition, but we, and especially I would say the Catholic expression of Christianity, we feel, we experience ourselves as encompassed in a living field of divine presence. And that living field is coextensive with the ongoing universe. And I don't know what that last thing is, but I guess we better keep going. In my enthusiasm, I keep, we continue to elaborate over these millennia, our saints and sages and mystics and teachers keep elaborating what is the fullness of our creation theology. When we say the light of faith, we mean our eco-spirituality is suffused and grounded in the wisdom of the biblical tradition. And then in this document, some of us feel we have not gone deeply enough into this facet, but we do speak into a new, vibrant, living, evolutionary cosmology in the document. This needs to be enhanced and developed. We speak very especially of the message of creatures. That is to say, we take very seriously that every single being, every living being, every entity on this planet is a manifestation of divine presence and creativity. We honor and perceive the harmony of creation. We say that we are in a universal communion. And again, as Father Thomas Berry would say, we do not look upon the natural world or the cosmos or the planet as a collection of objects, but as a communion of subjects. We also hold that all of the goods of the living planet we hold in common. And this is a really, really important and very controversial, I think, piece of the document. Catholics, by tradition, we do not hold the same conviction as most of our American fellows of the primacy of the individual and the rights of the individual and private property and all of these things. This is not our Catholic tradition. We hold a communion of goods, a community of goods and of sharing. And so this is being really enunciated by this Pope, which is why there's so much pushback to the particular teachings of Francis. This particular, our second chapter ends with a gorgeous meditation on the gaze of Jesus, because Jesus is the embodiment of the faith that we proclaim. So everything that exists, the least little thing we echo from the voice of wisdom, she who said, "For you have not made anything that you have hated. Everything that you have made, you love." Integral ecology is really the meat, I guess I'd say, chapter 4 of this document. It's really what we're saying. Again, we don't have two separate crises here, one environmental and the other social. That is to say, if you read the encyclical, you are made painfully aware of the situation of our human fellows on the planet. These are not two separate things. They are one complex crisis, both social and environmental, and therefore any remediation has to take into consideration all of the ecologies, the environmental ecology, the economic ecology, the social, the daily life ecology of each of us in our practice, the conviction and the primacy of the common good, and intergenerational justice. Chapter 6, I said I would just mention it. This is the longest chapter, which really delves deeply into, and I'm happy that the team of wisdom people had put this encyclical together under the authority of Francis, to say that ecological education must inform our ecological spirituality and action. And so he really makes a case for that, and how we need to understand that everything, of course, has to change. Everything has to change. But it's we human beings, above all, who need to change. And that's why we begin really with the opening to this conversion of heart, of perception, of mind, of will, of action, of practice. Francis says we lack an awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and of a future to be shared by everyone. So in this very pithy little sentence, we are really speaking out of a new cosmology of common origin, mutual belonging, and still an ongoing future. We're not finished yet. The human race, the human species is still quite young. Perhaps we have time. Ecological education has to guide us toward a new lifestyle and toward the covenant between humanity and the earth. And I think this is where we lean deeply on our Jewish roots. We lean deeply on our shared tradition of covenant. We make a very, very big commitment, if we take up the practice of Laudato Si, to ecological conversion in all its particularity. This is a lifetime work. We take it up not with depression or anguish. I will not say that depression and anguish do not press in on us. But if this document invites us to any kind of ecological spirituality, it's a spirituality of joy and of peace. It introduces us and calls us to civic and political love. You know, Christians talk about love one another. Jesus taught us to love one another. We have to love each other, our neighbor, as we love ourselves. Well, that's not just a personal, interpersonal, familial, or neighborhood reality. That's civic and political. Voting is a modality of expressing love for my neighbor. Ecological education means to awaken a sacramental sensibility. to all of the ways that the living creator is is living and creating in the moment. Creation's not just done. It is ongoing. It is the great festival of divinity manifesting itself in the universe. And then again, I think we turn to our Judaic roots. We must learn in the Christian tradition to honor the Sabbath and to celebrate what it means to rest and to let the earth rest from our extractions and all the rest. And then, of course, in this particular chapter, we go very deeply into our own particular theology of the Trinity, which baffles most Christians, and yet it is the ground, it is the mysterious ground of our understanding of divinity shining through creation. And then, because we're Catholics, we always turn to the Great Mother. We love the Mother by whatever name. In this document, we honor her as the Queen of Creation. And then we say we are really moving into the sun, into the life of the sun and all the stars itself. The document means to create in us an ecological citizenship, and it offers us, it challenges us to do so many things that I know all of our sacred traditions are inviting us to do, to mind how we eat. Eating is a moral act. Shopping is a moral act. The commitment to keep learning, to keep divesting, to learn how to reuse, to relearn how to be organic in a cycle like the earth itself is organic, where whatever we take, we give back, and we let the earth work her magic on transforming into life support again. We try to be a no-waste people, a recycling people. We really, in our teaching anyway, in the Berry Forum, we lean on the practice of eating and eating less meat, because any one of us can go into an analysis of what it means to put one burger on our plate. And so we need again to learn how to celebrate our covenant between the human species and all of our relations. And we will do this in the streets. We will do this in our sacred worship spaces. We will do this in the intimacy of our homes, in the syllabi of our universities and schools. It's not optional, this ecological conversion. It's not optional for any of us. We put it in a language that makes sense to us as Christians. This ecological conversion needs to be the way we manifest our faith, our living relationship of our encounter with the living Christ. It has to be a living our relationship with Christ, who is hiding and manifesting in every living cell of this universe. And that's how we live our vocation to be the protectors of God's handiwork. It's so essential to our life.